you heard of Anchor? Well, if you have not heard of Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. So let's get started today. Download the app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. It's free, it's simple, and it's convenient. You can distribute your podcast from your phone or your computer. You can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. So let's get started. You can also download your podcast to various podcast channels like Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts. So let's get started today. Download the app, the Anchor app, or go to anchor.fm and get started. Now stay tuned for MiThyme Motivation. Greetings and salutations, and welcome to another episode of MiThyme Motivation. And this is your host, Tasha Ryder, and welcome back. It's been a few days since we have spoken, but I definitely wanted to drop in to see how everyone is doing, wish everyone well. I know some states are opening up during these times. My state is still not open per se, but we're making some progress. And so, as always, thank you to the essential workers that are out there and all the people that are doing what you can as we continue to move forward, knowing this too shall pass. So let's get started. Today's episode is about busting misconceptions and myths and misinformation. And I wanted to give some recommendations on what those things are, but mostly it's going to be focused and targeted towards higher education. This is a myth that a lot of people have, which is that you don't need any education to be successful. And or it could be the truth for many people. You do not necessarily need education to be successful. But as I have worked in education, higher education specifically, for over 20 years, if you've been listening to my podcast, this is not new news. And I know that adult learners and younger students would come and say, well, XYZ person told me I don't need an education to be successful. And then they would list all the millions of people who became successful with no education and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm sure you, if you're well read or you watch your news buff, you know what these conversations would be and how many people say this all the time. And so I would always say, what talent do you have? What are you really great at that people are going to pay you for? What skill set do you have that you're going to make a lot of money? So whether that's, you're the best ballerina in the world, best soccer player, basketball player, you're very sports inclined, you can, play the best of baseball, the best of football. You just have this amazing talent. You're on your grind every day. You're hustling hard. If any of that sounds familiar, those are around the basis of conversations that I would have with my students. And so they would just give me this little blank look, like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? I'm me. I'm just going to be famous. And so my goal was never to discourage, but mostly to dispel the myth. So education does not make you better than anyone. Education does not mean that you're going to be successful. Education does not mean that you're never going to fail. Education does not mean that you're never going to have a down day or a day where the world feels like it's heavily weighing upon your shoulders. That's not what education means. Education does not mean that you'll never be broke, homeless, poor, or any of that. All of that thing is possible with and or without education, because life happens. And so there's many variables that are beyond your control that you have no control over. But if you listen to a podcast that I've done before, previously, control your controllables, then you already know what this story leads to. So I won't bore you with that, but I will say that when life happens, it's not necessarily what has happened to you that I would recommend focusing on. I would actually recommend focusing on your recovery. So that's something I know very well. When life has happened, I focus more so on my recovery. Control your controllables means things that you can control, you make a difference. It's a game changer. Things that you cannot control, you spend less focus on having so many negative emotions wrapped around things that you cannot control. Like this pandemic, unless you have a cure, an antivirus, a vaccine, or something like that, you can't control that. So that's an example of something that's beyond your control. However, you can control your routine as to how you wake up in the morning, what type of breakfast you eat, what lunch you choose, what dinner you choose. You can control that currently, in the current here and now. You can control those things. You can control what lessons your young people may be doing each day. Are they starting off with math? Are they starting off with reading? You can control whether you're going to get in your car and warm it up if it's cold outside, or remote start it if it's too hot, or you can control where you're going to walk or how far you're going to walk during these intense times. Those are things that we can control. We cannot necessarily control the $1 million in our bank account with our businesses, or lack thereof. You may not know what your profit and loss may look like currently, and maybe you have not done a full assessment of that in quarter one, and maybe your projections for quarter 2, 3, and 4 are a little off too, but it may look different than what you initially started the year off as with projections, for example. So those are some things and examples when you think about controlling your controllables. So with education and higher education, we know that yes, you have to go to primary, yes, you have to go to secondary education schools, and higher education is at the college and university level. So it's a choice. You can control whether you go or don't go, whether you finish, take time off, don't finish, and things like that. Now, what you may not be able to control right now is your start date. So many people were gearing up to start in August. Some people were looking at starting school sooner if you're at a for-profit college or university. Some students are now thinking about online because they've just shifted. I cannot control, for example, my start date. However, I can control whether I'm going to expose myself to the corona in being in classes every day, or am I going to go online and work through my first year in school at an online university or college while I just take elective courses, general education courses, until I get to my major, which may or may not be more costly depending on what school you initially chose to attend or university you chose to attend. So just kind of thinking about higher education, there's some myths there. Like, you can only go to school one way. That's a myth. You can go to school many ways. You can start off freshman and sophomore year, take online courses, take electives your junior and senior year with the school that you had hoped for, really be excited about your future, maybe not. Will all those courses transfer? That's based on the school and what they feel. So that may delay your graduation year. Instead of being a 4 or 5 year student, you might be a 5 or 6 year student, depending on what that looks like. But if you play your cards right, you also may graduate early. So that's controlling your controllables. Like, what's my plan A? What's my plan B? What's my plan C through Z? And so I know typically in higher education, many of the students I dealt with would often say, well, I have an A plan. And I would say, well, what's your B plan? They say, well, I just have an A and a B. The B is a backup plan. And I say, well, I like to create an A through Z plan because B may not work either. Then you're stuck. So I recommend for anyone really sit and have more thought-provoking conversations when you're making up your plan and your next steps, visions and aspirations for your life, goals, road mapping, whatever it is that makes you who you are. As you're doing that and figuring out what those years, your 3 looks like, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, don't stop dreaming, but keep planning past your plan A and B. I'm sorry, that was a little tongue twister there, but I'm very excited about your future, and I just definitely had to get on here to talk about higher education. Of course, hopefully you can hear my passion about this. I love education. I have a bachelor's, a master, and I'm all but done on a PhD. That is another story. And I say that not to brag or boast, but just because these things helped me throughout my careers. I've worked in 6 different industries, and I've mentioned this on previous videos as well. My former role was a vice president of operations for financial aid at a school where I did 8 campuses and 2 corporate offices. I was responsible for that. Not that I just couldn't figure out what my next steps were, but again, you have to, the goal for me has always been to be my own boss, and I got that, and I've been working on that, and this is a constant grind for me to get back to the level of thinking, or not get back to it, but really increase the level of thinking that I've had for many years. And of course, family things change, what your goals and aspirations are. It may mean that these things are delayed, not that you're denied. So we'll do a podcast about that. Delay does not necessarily mean denial. But I wanted to make sure that you had a great basis with understanding why I'm saying let's dispel the myths out there about higher education, or that you don't need education. Misinformation is quintessential to failure in my mind. And of course, you guys can leave messages or let me know what you think about that statement that I've made, but it's true. And so I think that, again, biblically, people perish for lack of knowledge. And I think the more you know, it's old cliche, the more you can grow. You've heard that before. I am truly a believer in it. I am what I consider to be a lifelong learner. So yes, I will sit in webinars, seminars, whether they're free, whether I have to pay for them. Everything to take in information is one of the reasons why I love watching so many different videos and listening to so much information that's out there and reading so much information, because all of these things matter. It's almost like building a toolkit for success. And so I'm committed to that, and I am happy to be a lifelong learner, because I'm not a professional student, of course. That was something my professor in undergrad had said. So what are you going to do when you get finished with this degree? And I would have to say, don't let your professors lock you into a box in regards to, well, what are you going to do? What's going to be your career? What are you dreamed of? Oh, I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a doctor. I mean, that's cute. But all of that could change, and then what? So mostly you just want to be the best version of yourself that you can possibly be. And that's how you stay motivated in MiThyme motivation. Thinking about constantly ways that you can love the you that you see in the mirror every day, because that's you. And